Resiliency is a dramatic shift in thinking. The shift is really fueled by an increasing body of research from the fields of psychology, psychiatry, sociology, increasingly from therapists and educators and social workers that are recognizing resiliency in the children and youth that they work with. I found resiliency in 1990. My husband at the time had gotten into a PhD program in psychology, so I became the primary breadwinner. We moved to Albuquerque. I took the first job that was offered to me by Albuquerque Public Schools, and little did I know there's where the answer was to the question, what is wrong with the deficit model? I was hired by the school district to direct a grant that they had just received from the U.S. Department of Education. This grant was for several $100,000. And the purpose of the grant was to go out and look at the research literature and to find this was about 91, the latest in the research literature about how to both prevent and intervene with all the problem behaviors, with all the things that children struggle with. I became the director of this grant, and I had to go out and look in the literature, and I came across a paper that had been written by a woman who's now a dear colleague. The paper was called Fostering Resiliency in Kids, Protective Factors in Families, Schools, and Communities. It was written by Bonnie Bernard, and Bonnie Bernard is also a social worker who has confided to me in recent years she really wanted to be a librarian, but she became a social worker. So she blended both of her interests, and she went into the obscure academic literature and found this emerging voice of psychologists and psychiatrists that were saying children and youth are far more than just whatever problems they may present. In fact, if you look at the longitudinal studies, the lifespan studies that have been done following children who have suffered a lot of trauma and abuse and neglect, even those that have gotten into all the problems that we are concerned about, the majority of these children do bounce back and do well in adulthood. When I read this paper, and first encountered the concept of resiliency, the fact that most children are resilient, and how it happens, it was the greatest aha of my professional career. And I have been an advocate from then on. In our Albuquerque project, we worked with 42 schools over a period of 4 years, and it became the impetus for my first book, which came out in 1996, called Resiliency in Schools, making it happen for students and educators. I found working in Albuquerque some of the biggest hearts in some of the most challenging situations. They just went to town and really turned their schools into resiliency building schools. So I saw how that happened organizationally. What happened for me personally was word got out about this great project we were doing in Albuquerque. I had to, as a result of the grant funding, speak at national conferences. And I was like, oh, no. But I did. I started getting invited to go to other states to talk about what was going on with resiliency and how we were able to integrate it into the schools and into a lot of the agencies that were interfacing with the schools and how the parents could get on board. Pretty soon, I personally had 2 jobs. I was out trying to spread this wonderful new paradigm as well as doing my Albuquerque project. So the time came when I decided I had to just spread this information. And that's what I've been doing full time. I have had all the questions that you've posed. Specifically, I've had the question, how is it that some children seem to be more easily resilient than others? When I was working as a social worker, both in the agency and in the school district that we partnered with, I would ask myself that question all the time. And the other question that I think all of us ask ourselves, whether we're educators or counselors or working in agencies, is that given the stress that many of the children and youth experience that are the ones that we're working with, what good is 1 hour with me? That's what I used to ask myself. What good is 1 hour with me? If they have an hour a week with me in a support group setting, I know many, many teachers, because at this point I've trained probably hundreds of thousands of teachers, and they ask themselves, how much can I actually do when the child might be in a negative neighborhood environment or a negative family difficulty? What can I personally do? And one of the things about the resiliency research and the strategies that come from that research is that it is extremely empowering. Because what the resiliency research really documents in very scientific social science research, so that's what gives it a lot of its credibility, is that in fact, one teacher, one counselor, one person, one family member has an enormous amount of power to foster resiliency in a child, to help that child bounce back. What I want to do then is I want to share with you exactly how resiliency happens according to this research. Specifically, practically, how does it happen? And exactly what should we be doing, both one-on-one and programmatically. Resiliency happens in two ways. It happens every day in one-to-one interactions. Almost every one of our conversations can be a resiliency building conversation. There are definitely programmatic things that we can put in place that will make those programs more effective resiliency building programs. I'm going to share with you the 4 most important steps to fostering resiliency that you can walk away and use immediately. The research is documenting exactly how people bounce back. And the good news is that most people do bounce back. And I will just say parenthetically that though we are here today focused on children and youth, the majority of people across the lifespan, whether we're talking about very young people or very old people, do bounce back because of the concepts that are in the resiliency approach. So this is an approach that can be used with your grandma, or an aging parent, or a friend that's struggling through a difficult divorce. This is an approach that you can use for yourself and your family.